Welcome back to Laid Open Podcast. This is your host, Charna Cassell. And today's guest, Alreen Haeggquist, is a women's rights advocate and a lawyer who defends women dealing with sexual abuse, harassment, and discrimination. And our conversation was so interesting because she can help talk about some of the nuts and bolts of how to deal with a lawyer and face that situation if you're considering taking up a case, but also her personal experience. She wrote a memoir about her own experience with sexual abuse inside her family and her process of healing. So, she's really an advocate for women's voices to be heard, and she models that through her work in the world and her own personal sharing. So, she's a very rare breed and courageous woman. And I hope you enjoy this episode and find that it's helpful to you. I look forward to you listening. Learn how to live embodied. Your life is about to unwind. Uncover new tools and start healing. Leave trauma and tension behind. Isn't it great laid open? Let all your desires come true. How can you live laid open? Imagine yourself brand new. Imagine yourself brand new. Welcome, Alreen.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that this worked out, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I feel like what you have to offer, your not only your personal life experience, but your professional experience as a lawyer, a women's rights advocate, someone who speaks out and stands for, non-discrimination, rights for folks when they're dealing with history of sexual trauma and sexual assault is really important. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And so can you start with sharing a little bit about you founded your firm 16 years ago,
Yes.
and what was your intention when you created it?
I wanted a place for one, the people that worked here to create a culture where there was no ceiling for a woman to advance as a partner and as a lawyer. And I also wanted to create a place for clients to come to where they had attorneys that understood what they had gone through and could understand the experiences that they were having, not in the same way, but they could relate to what they experienced. A lot of the firms at the time were very male dominated, male centric, and there wasn't a lot of female owned firms. So I really wanted something different for myself, for my employees, and the clients that I represented.
And you're located in Los Angeles, is that right?
I'm in San Diego.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
San Diego. And so do people actually reach out to you from all over, or is it more like centrally located in your area?
I would say people reach out all over from California. We have a primary presence here in San Diego because that's where we've been, but people from all over the state contact us. And it's become primarily women that contact us, just again, because we're unique in the way that we have a female-owned firm and represent women on behalf of gender discrimination, sexual harassment, sexual assault, where I think women are uniquely placed to do those cases as opposed to men.
Well, and you also have you're trauma informed, and you have a survivor advocate.
Yes, which is also very unique, and I also think is very important. She's a non-lawyer, she's a non-therapist. Those two people are also important, but what's unique about her is she's gone through the litigation process herself, and she is certified as a survivor advocate to help you through the process as you have anxiety. You don't know what all the terminology means. You might not know why the lawyer might be doing a certain thing. She connects you to resources, to therapists if you're having a hard time finding one. She provides, grounding techniques to kind of bring you back to the present, sometimes when you're spiraling. So she's a wealth of information and is a wonderful resource at our firm.
Which also, like, a lot of the things that you just described are trauma informed. And is there anything else that you would add if somebody doesn't know what that means and is looking for a lawyer, and things to look out for, like green flags as well as red flags?
So the reason that we have a trauma-informed survivor advocate is she provides training to all the lawyers
Mm.
and all the staff here at the firm so that when a client comes into our office, we're not re-traumatizing them by just asking them questions. Like, words matter. And so she trains us on how we approach certain situations, helps us understand, people aren't going to provide you this like nice linear chronological story that you expect to receive. That's not how trauma works. They come in fragmented pieces. And it's our job as lawyers to put those pieces together. And it's not just going to happen in one session. Like, we have to have multiple meetings with people to get that information. So I think that's more of a holistic approach towards a person and a client that comes into our office, and not just like, oh, you're here for a lawsuit. I'm going to go through this checklist of information that I need.
That is so fantastic. Like, knowing that you exist and that those are some standards and values that you have in your firm is remarkable. And can you imagine if that was the standard for every rape trial? Like,
I
how
know.
unbelievable would that be,
I
right?
agree.
Oh my God. I love that.
Yeah, and
That's
Christy, our survivor advocate, she believes in it so strongly. That's really what she's been pitching. Like, law firms need to have a survivor advocate if you're going to do this work. You need to understand how trauma works, and you can't just do the case if you don't have a baseline understanding of what that's doing to the client that's coming into your office.
well, in the same line of questioning that's occurred for forever, right? It's like, well, why didn't you say no? Well, if we have a basic understanding of how the nervous system works and how your vocal cords can even freeze, or if you, I mean, there's just so many pieces of basic psychology and nervous system education that all judges, all lawyers should have,
Yeah,
right?
that's totally correct. Yep. But we don't. We're not trained in that in law
Yeah,
school.
yeah. How did you, so you have a book, you're not, you're a lawyer as well as an author, and Fired Up, Fueling Triumph from Trauma is the name of your book. And it's a memoir. And how did, given your history, like, and then being in an environment that is so male dominated, that is so like assaultive in its own way, how did that work for you, and how was that regarding, like, getting potentially re-traumatized, having compassion fatigue? Like, what was that experience? Or what
It was
is
a
that?
process, and it continues to be a process. It wasn't overnight. So I had, prior to coming out with the book, obviously had done a lot of self-work, lots of therapy, lots of different healing modalities before I got to the point of sharing my story with the world. But the reason I felt like it was so important is because by not staying silent is really the way you start to heal yourself from your past trauma. And for me to share it in the book, that was my way to show women, how do you speak your truth?
Mm.
How do you come out and come forward? And it doesn't have to be writing a book, but you need to start somewhere. And so that was the reason I wrote it. And, all the women that come to my office, they have to share their story. They have to make their story public. They have to be cross-examined about it. But despite all that, at the end of it, they feel empowered, hopeful, as opposed to the helpless person and the scared person they came in when they started off the case. And so I've seen it from experience when women stop the silence and share their story, and with my own personal self, how I've transformed by no longer letting it eat at me by just keeping it inside. That's
Mm.
really how I have progressed and triumphed despite the circumstances that I experienced when I was a child.
So first of all, thank you for writing your book. And I'm curious, did that come out after Me Too?
Yes. So, and I have a whole part about this in my
Yeah.
book. During Me Too, I mean, I was so excited for women, and I was so excited that people were sharing their story. But at the same time, I was so scared to share my own. I never even said
Mhm.
Me Too.
Right.
And it made me feel horrible about myself. I felt like such a hypocrite for encouraging all these women in my office to step forward, but I couldn't do it myself.
Mhm.
And, what was the final, like, you got to come out? It was really a process of like, you, this is powerful. by speaking out, me too, it's not only powerful for your own being, it helps all these other people come forward and share their story.
Well, and in particular, in certain roles, right? Like I know there that traditionally as a psychotherapist, we're supposed to be a blank slate, right? We're supposed to be like, keep all of our personal information to ourselves. I have found over time, like my personal style is actually being more transparent because it levels the power playing field, right? So clients don't feel as much like I have one up. And I could imagine, I pictured you giving this book to clients and wondered if you used it as a tool to create safety with the people that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, I share my book, with them just to let them know that
Mm.
I have experienced something similar in my life and that I know what a journey it is, that I know that it's not overnight, it's not even in a month, it's a journey to get there, and that's why I can understand and support them as they go through this process. But it will happen, right? Like, it's not hopeless. It's you gotta see the light, there's a light to it.
Well, and again, this piece of I know that I'm on the other side, and we talked a little offline about what an ongoing process healing is. There's these repeated cycles that you go through, and it just because your body has spoken through something, you verbalize something, it doesn't mean it's totally complete in your nervous system. But the fact that you wrote this book and that you're sitting here as an advocate for them in itself is a beacon, right? And have you had clients read the book and come back to you and go like, "Oh, here are some I based on how you healed, I have sought out these different resources."
Yeah, and a lot of clients have just come to me and, like, just told me, like, "You really pinpointed exactly how I felt during
Mm,
this time," you know?
mhm.
You describe the feelings as you're working through it. Your book has helped me see that I need to talk about it. I mean, I just received an email, this week from someone that was like, "I haven't talked about the situation that happened to me in the past,
Yeah.
but your book brought it up and now I'm addressing it in therapy," you know? And so that's beautiful to hear. That's the entire point of my book is coming out so I can help somebody else take the steps to start talking about it and heal from it.
Yeah.
And regarding the process, I mean, when I first started seeing my therapist, I thought I was going to go 4 times. I was going to talk about what happened to me when I was a kid, and we're going to be done. I was going to be ready to move on. Yep, check the box. We're good to go. I'll see my therapist tomorrow. It's every part. What I've learned is things keep coming up in your life, and you are using the therapist or the other tools that you've gathered in your toolbox to help process the information and kind of get you to the next level. And there's not a stop to it because life is going to continue. Things are going to be thrown at you throughout your life, and you're going to need to work through it because brings back in some way or another the trauma that you experienced.
Right. Well, and I just, again, I imagine that for you, doing the work that you do, um potentially feeling the rage with each woman's story who comes into you and the discrimination or the abuse or oppression that they're dealing with, and that often present day experiences of powerlessness, even if they're tiny, could be dealing with the insurance company or AT&T or something, let alone what you're dealing with at work, can then trigger your own personal original, like, youngest experiences of powerlessness.
That's correct, but that's how I've used that in the law. It's actually what helps me be a powerful advocate for my client. So, yes, I still feel very rageful. And so that rage, before I didn't have it in control or in check, I guess, because I didn't recognize that's what was happening. But now with that awareness, when that rage comes on me, I recognize that it's happening.
Mhm.
I breathe through it, but I still come out very fierce in responding to whatever's being thrown, like what we were talking about earlier, like the client, well, your client, didn't say no in this situation, if she didn't, want this to happen to her, then she could have voiced, her no. She just went along with it. And so that gets me really fired up for what we were talking about. That's not how it works. That's not how the nervous system works. And not everybody has the same response when they're experiencing sexual assault. And so that I think it kind of scares people because they're like, okay, she's she's not going to accept whatever I'm just throwing at her.
Well,
And she's not going to go away.
one of the things I appreciated in your book, and you referred to it just now a little bit, but you gave this part of yourself, this rageful part of yourself, a name, Insane Hussein,
Yeah.
and that she would come out in different moments, and that you learned how to have a relationship to her. And what I really appreciate, and you may know about parts work. So whether you're following something like, Dick Schwartz's style of internal family systems, no bad parts, or if you're just any trauma informed work is going to address parts of us, right? We have so many different conflicting parts. The part that loves your father, who is your abuser, the part that wants to destroy him and all men, potentially, or anybody who's oppressing somebody, right?
Right. Hmm.
And so how a part of healing is befriending, accepting, as well as being grateful for all the range of parts, not just the pretty good girl parts, right?
Yeah, that took me a long time to grasp, and it wasn't until I had a lot of physical manifestations in my body through ulcers, and I couldn't understand what was happening. I thought it was a medical condition, and it was really coming to terms, and I did inner child work, coming to terms with how the abuse as a child made me feel and accepting that as opposed to trying to push it away, right? That's like, you want that. You want to resist it. You're like, I don't like it. Go away. As opposed to absorbing it, that's a part of you and everything's going to be okay, right? Like, I'm now the adult in my life that I was hoping existed when I was a child to tell me, okay, it's going to be okay. And taking that piece as part of me was what stopped the physical manifestations in my body. And that's just so powerful, but it's hard for it was hard for me to connect the mind body part of it. And I think people have a hard time grasping it, but it's like once you get it and it happens to you, it's so powerful. And same with the aspect of rage. It's like, it was affecting my relationships. So I was trying to push it away. Like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be that rageful, angry person. And that's how my father was. And I, was trying to push it as opposed to accepting it and recognizing that's powerful when used, in an affirmative way, right? It's not a negative. It's still part of you, but you can harness it, for good, essentially.
Well, and what you just pointed to is really important in terms of, seeing like, oh, I don't want to be anything like this abuser. I don't want to, the fear of being that person. And so then pushing away something that ultimately could be used to empower you. And that anytime we cut ourselves off from part of ourselves, right? We disown it. It's also disempowering because we're making part of ourselves bad, and we're kind of like, think about it. If you cut off a limb, right, you don't have that hand to fight with, or to reach for what you want with, right? It's like we aren't totally whole in that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I was curious about, like, post Me Too, has there been a bigger influx? Are more people as a result of that coming forward? Or are you, I imagined like your caseload got massive, but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. I mean, that's what Me Too is all about, right? As a result of sexual trauma, sexual abuse, you really feel like you're all alone. Like, this hasn't happened to anybody else. And the only person that this happened to is you. If people find out, they either won't believe you, they'll think you're at fault. And so that aloneness after the Me Too movement changed, right? Me Too people are realizing, oh, wow, that was happening this whole time. Well, that happened to me as well. So yes, there was an increase in women coming forward and being able to tell their story. And I think it's resulted in women not accepting it anymore. We're changing society. We're changing cultural norms. Like, this is not acceptable behavior. And we're not just going to stay silent and let you get away with it anymore. So that was a really big shift, which is why I'm so proud of the women who initially came forward, because that initial step was really hard, but it had such a huge, profound rippling effect on so many others.
And do you see that? So, like, one of the things that I want to contribute in the world is I would love for enough trauma education to be part of like household awareness, knowledge that it does change what happens in rape trials, right? Like
Yes.
there is that line of questioning is gone,
Right.
you know? And so I'm curious, like, how has that changed? Are are you an exception, or do you feel like other lawyers and situations, cases that you're in, that there is more awareness?
I think it's starting. I think it's
Okay.
starting. So I still think we're unique. I do think it's starting, but because we're doing, there's training on trauma informed lawyering. Like now when we go to conferences, that's a section, at the conference, right?
It's
For
amazing.
lawyers to do a better job because your clients have experienced trauma. So how are you not trauma informed? So I think it's changing, but that's a shift that I've seen in the past like 1 to 2 years where this is showing up in our conferences and we're having a discussion about it more regularly. Whereas before, and I feel like that's in society too, like people are now talking about it, just like, mental illness, like
Yeah.
that wasn't talked about. And people are now just becoming more aware of being okay to talk about it because they recognize they're not all alone when they do.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing. I have a lot of friends who do, gender, racial equity trainings in big institutions or even with police and things like that. And you know, sometimes it's just a required eh, short little course where they can check it off. It's not as thorough, and other situations it's much more thorough. So my hope is that it isn't something that's just a continuing education requirement, so to speak, and that it becomes an actual culture changer.
Yeah, I mean, I really think I'm a believer that it's only going to be a cultural changer if leaderships and leaders participate and think it's important. Like if you go to
Yeah.
a racial equity training or a gender equity training and the CEO or the founder or whoever isn't there, or they just have you watch a pre-recorded,
Right.
online video, it shows that they don't take it seriously. And it is exactly that. It's a checkbox that we were required to do and we're doing it, as opposed to, hey, we want to have a very inclusive work environment. We want to make sure people feel included in the workplace. We want equity for all of our employees. And if that's the message you're coming out with, that's going to make a shift, in society and in our culture. It's through leadership.
Well, and immediately when you said, it's about leadership, I unfortunately pictured our Trump years
Yeah,
as we approach them again and the permission that that granted. But at the same time, because it was so heinous and the shadow was so big, there was this other wave and Me Too happened. And, but at the same time, I was reading different news articles and looking at a response to sexual assault in South Korea versus Italy versus the United States. And so the things that I was reading, there was a situation with one of the actors who is in Squid Games. He's like a 79-year-old man or something who hugged and kissed one of his co-stars, and he was sentenced to like 8 months in prison, 2 years in parole.
oh,
I know, right? I was like, "Okay, go South
yeah,
Korea, like,
yeah,
come on." He
yeah.
hugged and kissed her, and it's still, like, not consensual, but compared to in Italy, there was a janitor in a high school who stuck his hand inside one of the female students, teenage students' underpants, and the judge threw it out and said it was less than 10 seconds. So there's been this whole social media response, these videos on Instagram where people are touching themselves, like touching their bodies for 10 seconds to show how extraordinarily long, it
That
doesn't even
is.
matter, right? It's absurd. And
Yeah,
then we look at, grabbing people by the pussy, and we look at a president who is accused of sexually assaulting a 14-year-old, and,
yeah.
anyways, so what do you And you're working within the United States, within California.
Yes.
You're not working in South Korea.
Right. Right.
So what do you see there?
I mean, here's the thing. That's what's so amazing. We have so many laws that say sexual violence and sexual abuse is not okay. I mean, that's across the board. Nobody says this conduct is okay or it's acceptable. But, and if you come forward, there are people that are going to support you and believe you. The problem is that there's always a defense, right? There's always an attack when you do come forward. It's not just like, there's not this accountability. I mean, in every case, the first step is to deny, like just deny it ever happened. When the denial doesn't work, it's to tell the woman she wanted it, she consented to it, she was in that situation. And then thirdly, when that doesn't work, it's just to attack the woman, every aspect, right? For anything that you've done in your life, it's to attack your credibility and who you are. And that's hard, right? It's like, that's a lot to deal with. But if you could overcome that, which is why we're here, right? You develop your team to stand with you, like you have your people, behind you to overcome those defenses, because it happens in every case. It's not personal towards you. It's just, this is the only way they can defend themselves. They don't just take accountability and recognize that wasn't appropriate and I'm going to do something about it.
That it's, I can feel my chest and throat like gripping and kind of closing as you describe that. And I know that information, and yet imagining all the women that have to go through that, and just picturing how it's a remarkable thing to not have ulcers, to be able to breathe through that as you hold space for that experience daily. That's a lot.
It is, but I find it so important and so rewarding.
No doubt.
For them to have a place where there's a group of people who tells them, I believe you, I hear you, and you don't have to go through this alone, right? And that's really powerful for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I get a similar satisfaction when I'm doing, I'm helping recreate new neural pathways in my clients' brains. It doesn't matter, not that it doesn't matter that they didn't have it the first time, like when they were assaulted as children, but getting to do physical practices, somatic practices with them to be their advocate then, to protect them, like to protect them now, and know that there's something changing in their brains that can impact their whole nervous system.
That's powerful. That's so powerful.
Someone else is like, oh my God, that's so exhausting. How do you do that? It's exhausting. And so I love that we each, I feel like we have our life experiences. I wouldn't wish them on anybody else, yet they give me a very specific set of tools. And then my path of healing has allowed me to provide a service and facilitate that for other people. And that's really what I hear has happened for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just a little bit of like logistical stuff, if somebody did have a case, right, there's the statute of limitations in terms of there's child sexual abuse, there's also sexual assault. What are some of the laws around that would be useful for people to know?
So sometimes people think that the statute of limitations has expired, especially if you were abused as a child and now you're coming forward as an adult. Well, it's from the discovery date, right? And it's there's a little some nuances to that. But the point being, if you were abused as a child and you want to come forward as an adult, you most likely can, because there's a recognition that trauma doesn't resurface, or that you might even not even have the memory that occurred until later, or that you're not ready to come forward until you're an adult, after therapy, after working through some of these things. So the statute of limitations isn't going to prevent you from bringing that claim if you want to come forward as an adult. With respect to women in the workplace, same thing. The statute of limitations used to be 1 year, but they've extended it to 3 here in California. They're planning to extend it even longer for the same reason. You don't all of a sudden like get assaulted or harassed in the workplace and like, oh, I'm going to file a lawsuit. It's if you're experiencing trauma from that situation, you see a therapist, you work through it, and then you're like, hey, that wasn't right, and I want to do something about it. So there are statute limitations, but they might be longer than you think. But always consult with a lawyer to find out what your statute of limitations is, so you
Mhm.
know you don't blow it.
And how does that also in terms of date rape, right? So if the person knows that it occurred and it doesn't come back to them later, and let's say it was 10 years prior.
Yeah, that one's
How's
harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's harder, and you might be prevented from bringing that claim because
Mhm.
it's based on that discovery date.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the statute of limitations, it depends on what laws you bring it under, but you're looking at approximately 3 years.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
How have you been feeling about Harvey Weinstein and the latest?
It's I'm thinking about all the survivors that have to come, they're having a retrial, but having to come tell your story again. That's who I'm
Yeah,
thinking about.
totally.
Like, that's the part that's, like, wrong, like, they've already had to testify already. They already had to give
Yeah.
their story. They were already on the stand. They already had to be cross-examined. And even though he's gonna stay in jail for all of his other crimes,
Mhm.
I understand wanting to retry it to not let him get away with it in New York, but yeah, all of these people have to come forward again and the effect on them. That's who I'm thinking about.
Of course. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There's not I mean, yeah, I'm just right now I'm just thinking about everything that happened with Cosby.
Yeah.
Like how insane.
Yeah. And how many that's the thing, it took so many women, you know, but
69 or
yeah,
something?
I forget the numbers right now, but how many times it had to occur before one woman, finally steps forward, and then that's when all the other ones come forward, because that's when they realize they're not alone.
Right, right.
There's strength in numbers.
I'm curious about the cases that you've tried and people in the medical field as well as in the military. That's if there are certain organizations or fields that you see more people coming forward or less people coming forward.
Yeah, I think people who have power in positions of power and influence, it happens. I feel like I see it more in those places. And I think it's because they think they can get away with it, or they
Mm,
haven't gotten away with it for so long. Who's going to believe the person
mhm.
coming forward, because they are who they are?
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, that's how the woman feels, right? Like, they're not going to believe me against him. He has such a big reputation. He's been in this industry for so long. So many people like him. Why are they going to believe that it happened to me?
Right.
And so, one, it's I feel like that's our specialty, is going up against people who think they're above the law. And so that's where we see it more with respect to doctors. Sadly, it's really hard to take away their license. Like, I think, with each one of our cases against a doctor, we report it to the medical board, because I think they should not be licensed, have access to women,
Mhm,
patients and employees,
mhm.
when they commit that kind of conduct. But to get the license taken away is a lot harder than you would think,
Yeah.
which is surprising. To me, is surprising, because it's like, I don't know what you would need to take a license away.
Yeah. Well,
You
and
know?
I have a lot of nurse and doctor clients, and I think of the medical field as operating like the military, you
Yeah.
know?
There's so much trust. I mean, they're really put on such a pedestal, right? And so then you have all this power and influence, and, like, people are trusting you. And when
Mhm.
you break that, I think there should be consequences to
Oh,
breaking that trust.
well,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
you'd think, well, look at families, right?
Yeah.
Look how common incest occurs, right?
Yeah.
It's like those are the people that are ultimately you're supposed to put all of your trust in, and they're supposed to be your protectors. And so, yeah, uh, um, I'm also thinking about the hierarchy of power that exists. So it's even abuse of nurses by doctors
Oh, right.
or the system itself, how the system itself doesn't protect. It's not just it's like patients, but but the
Right.
staff, if
Staff.
subordinates. I had a woman on my podcast, Imagine, who did a documentary At Your Cervix, which is
Okay.
about assault of patients when they're under they at teaching hospitals where cervical exams, not women and men, where pelvic exams, not just cervical exams, but anal exams occur without their consent because they're basically just signing, you go in at 6 a.m. for a procedure for your foot operation and you sign the waiver, and then you don't know that 150 students are performing an exam on you.
Wow.
And this is not illegal in a lot of states.
Wow.
It's an incredible documentary. I highly recommend you see it.
Wow.
And so, yeah. And then if a student, a resident is uncomfortable with this process and comes forward, they're basically told, you know, you this doesn't seem like the right fit for you. Like maybe
Wow.
you shouldn't be here. And so there were a couple residents or that were interviewed for the uh for the documentary.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is, I had no idea.
I can send you a link.
Okay. Okay. Wow. Like,
Yeah, it would be an interesting I've hosted like a listening or a watching
uh-huh.
party with that, and the conversations are pretty interesting afterwards or
I
during.
would think that people were shocked, right? Were you shocked when you watched it?
Well, so what's crazy, so years ago, I worked at Good Vibrations, so I was a sexuality educator, and this was, over 20 years ago, there were a handful of people that were teaching models at Stanford, right? So you'd go in and you would be part of the rotation, and they would do exams, palpate your ovaries for part of their education,
Wow.
and you get paid like $40 or something. And I considered doing it. And so
Wow.
I knew about this. And one of the women who was at this watch party was one of those models.
Wow.
But she still didn't even know the degree that this was happening because this is part of the conscious training, not the unconscious training, right?
Right. Right.
One of the people who made the film was also uh, one of those trainers, one of the models who's teaching the students
Wow.
by using their own bodies.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I could never do that.
Yeah.
My own experience. Yeah.
I wonder why. So post writing this book, I know that you felt guilty for not coming out and saying me too, literally. But what it served its purpose, right? It worked you and gave you the courage to then work on this book and come out with this book. So was this a project during uh quarantine? Did you write this book during that time, or had you done a lot of the writing, you just didn't come forward with it?
Exactly. I had
Okay.
started writing it, not necessarily during COVID. It was a little, I guess that it was. I started thinking about putting it out there in a book. Yeah, right around that time. Lots more time to think during that period.
Uh-huh.
Um, and then yeah, I started it in 21. So yeah, it was. I didn't look at it as a COVID project. It was just time for me to do it.
Well, the way that I think about that period is that it was an incubator.
Yeah.
That it really was it helped people be very discerning. It helped people establish boundaries because when you take all the things away that are, unless they're absolutely essential for day-to-day work and living, and then they start to come back in, you really can feel the impact on your body and your psyche. And we had a lot less tolerance for bullshit on the other side,
Yeah. Very
right?
true. And I really just had a lot more time with myself. And I wasn't just like running to, events and work, all the stuff
Mm-hmm.
on a day to day. So a lot more time just with myself and more time with just my immediate family, my husband and my daughter, as opposed to the extended family. And so
Exactly.
created some boundaries there as well. So yeah, I hadn't looked at it that way, but yeah, that's probably what caused like, okay, I'm now ready to
Allowed
do
you,
this. Yeah. Allowed me to
right?
say, I'm
Like
going to do this.
And that's so then I wondered also about your family's response to the book.
Yeah, it hasn't been great. So I've had, nieces and nephews that have responded, like, they're so thankful that I shared the story because it really gave them perspective of understanding their parents. I'm the youngest of 10 kids.
Mhm.
So for me, I didn't want to pass on the generational trauma that I've seen my siblings pass on. And it really helped my nieces and nephews, I think, just understand their parents a little bit more because it's
Mhm.
the stories that nobody has ever told them.
Mhm.
And on the flip side, it's been some siblings that have completely stopped talking to me because they don't understand why I needed to
Yeah.
share the story and why I needed to share the family secrets. And, things were fine. Everything's been fine. What do you need to talk about this for? So that's been hard, um, because they're not even giving me an opportunity to explain or why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But I also recognize and have the empathy for they didn't have all the tools. I've been doing this for a long time and working on this for a while. So for them, I'm kind of forcing
Mhm.
them to process this information and take it in and accept it
Mm.
when they might not have been ready for it themselves. So
Well,
it's been an
yeah.
interesting journey as the book has come out with the family.
Just like you weren't ready when everyone was saying, "Me too, me too, me too." We all have our different timelines, and um, you might have planted a seed of courage or, willingness to be aware, but that also may not be that person's path in this
Right.
time, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad the next generation has you as a resource in your family to help
Yes.
them understand and choose a different way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
A question that I ask my guests is, how would you define, like, what is that to you?
Oh, what is freedom to me?
Yeah, what is embodied freedom or sexual
Oh,
freedom or
got it.
freedom?
I think just feeling good in my own skin, like just feeling like I have a place and I feel good when I walk around as opposed to ashamed of my being and apologizing for my existence. I don't feel that way anymore. Like I like being me and I like being, around and I feel comfortable when I'm talking to people, whoever they might be. But to me, that's freedom. It's just being able to be myself and love myself and being proud of getting to this point despite everything that has happened.
Yeah, so important. One of the things that you talked about that seemed like a turning point for you, or, there are so many of them, but one of them that was really important was a gratitude practice. And initially, there's a lot of resistance to it,
Yeah.
and what I like to offer at the end of every episode is some kind of practice or exercise that has made a difference in, like my host life or in my life that my listeners can then choose to do. I know that Dr. Joe Dispenza meditation practices have also been something that have made a huge difference for you and your perspective and feeling more empowered around what's happening in your body. And so I'm curious if there's anything you want to share about the role of practice in your life and then also actually guide us in a 5-minute exercise.
Sure. I don't know if I can guide a 5-minute exercise.
No worries, no worries.
But practice is really important. It's just, the thoughts start spiraling in your head and you start going down, places that you don't want to go. For me, it was a lot of negative talk, right? Like telling myself I was a failure. I wasn't going to make it. I was ugly. I was stupid. Nobody was going to, listen to me. There were so many other better lawyers out there. I mean, every horrible thing that if somebody was saying that to you, I would punch them in the face, but I was okay telling myself all of those horrible things. The gratitude practice was really transformative because you started practicing focusing on something else besides the negative self-talk and like telling yourself how wonderful all these wonderful things you had in your life, that if you started focusing on that, you could you could see it differently. You could change your vocabulary. And so I started with every morning, 3 things. And sometimes it seems really stupid, I'm really thankful for this, the sun outside. I'm really thankful for the warm bed. I'm really thankful for a hot shower. And it seemed silly when you started writing it down because it's like, it was like, well, that's so obvious. But it provides a shift because now you're focusing on all these things and you realize you are surrounded by all this love and warmth when you that of people that love you when you and you're the only one that creating this, you know, these issues for yourself. With respect to the meditations, I mean, that again was just powerful because it was like the light bulb went out. Like if I change my thoughts, I can change my whole life. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the gratitude. It's like just change the way you're thinking and you can experience the world in a completely different way. But that requires practice because all of those thoughts you've had in your life for a long time. And so practicing allows you to change it on a daily basis. So I don't know if I have anything to lead people into because for me, it has to be like quiet. But that's really the practice. And that's why Joe Dispenza's meditations allowed me to practice changing my thoughts. It shifted my energy to a different way where now I don't have that negative self-talk. Or if I do, I come back to the tools that I know I have to change it.
I could actually mention a practice. So a very similar kind of practice. And this came from Brother Ishmael Tete, who was a teacher of mine. He's a mystic from Ghana, like third generation mystic,
Wow.
and really remarkable man. And so the practice is, and I tweak it and I change it, and it's very much it's in the same vein. The notion is if the habit has been looking for all the ways that you're bad or looking for all the things that don't work, how can I start to shift my belief and start to see how I am good, right? Or how my environment nourishes me. And so his practice was 10 things in the morning. You write down a list of 10 ways, like kind of notions of your goodness, right? Almost like gratitude for yourself, like things that you appreciate about how you are, right? Or things that you've done. In the morning, you wake up and you reflect on your previous week and you choose 10 ways that you have shown up in a way that feels good to you, that show you your own goodness. And at the end of each day, you reflect on 10 things from that day.
I love it.
So, right?
Yeah.
And they could be tiny. They could be little things. Yeah.
When I'm telling clients, like how do you get your power back, right? This situation or this experience took a piece of your power back, but it's innately in you. How do you start to get it back? And something similar that I tell them is like take inventory of everything you've done that has been very powerful. Like you being right here in this space right now is very powerful. If you had you gave birth to a child, that's very powerful. You formed this beautiful relationship with your partner or your spouse. That's very powerful. You live in San Diego, and just taking inventory of all these things that have already been powerful in your life will allow you to see that there's still a lot of power to be had and that it's been there the whole time. So anyways, I think very similar type practice.
Well, and the reality is that, the reason there are so many similar practices is because they work.
That is very true.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
He taught a practice. I was on a retreat with him, and there was a practice that we did that's very similar to the Ho'oponopono practice, using the same phrases like, I'm sorry, please I love you, I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you. Like these phrases are universally powerful words. And they've come from totally different parts of, like, one is in Hawaii and one is in Africa,
Yeah.
right? That came to them, right? Um, and so there's a reason there, you don't have to invent the wheel,
Right.
right? You can just you can tweak it a little so I love that, right?
Yeah.
So that you're, instead of replacing goodness, because so much of what happens with child abuse or assault or is believing in our badness,
Yeah.
right?
That you're bad. It happened to you because you're bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You caused it. Your beingness caused it in some way. So then starting to reframe and see your own goodness and the goodness that is possible, that you can keep generating and that you've already generated, as you pointed out. And I
Yeah.
love it. Like going, okay, it could be goodness, it could be power,
Mhm.
and so much there can be. Going back to the thing that you said, which is I was afraid of my own anger because of I didn't want to be like my father. Well, he was also powerful. He used power over versus power with, or power to support,
Yeah.
right? And so then
Yeah.
how do you, as a woman who has been subject to the abuse of power, how do you embrace being powerful? And I think that's a huge part of, the post-trauma process, is
Yeah.
reclaiming that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with the listeners, but beyond how they can find you, reach you, find out more about you?
I always tell people to take action now, right? If you don't have a practice, start a practice. If you haven't shared your story, put it in a journal. Like, don't wait, because I just think life is so short and so precious, and the relationships you have are so precious that you want to live your best self. And that really has to start somewhere. And it has to, you just have to take one little step, and then you'll start just feeding off of it. Right? It's like a high you keep wanting to chase because you keep, evolving and feeling better as you go through the process.
Mhm. So true. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been, yeah, a great conversation.
I love knowing that you're out there and knowing that you're a resource. So,
Yeah, thank you.
thank you for joining us. If you found this information useful, please like, rate, review, and share it with people that you think it would benefit. If you want to stay connected to me, you can find us at Laid Open Podcast, LAIDPODCAST, on Instagram and Facebook. And you can also find me on my website, info at Passionate Life, if you want to send me an email, or passionatelife.org, and charnacassell.com if you want to sign up for my newsletter. You hear about courses I'm offering and all the latest, and read my blog. This has been Laid Open Podcast with your host, Charna Cassell. Until next time, may this podcast connect you to new resources for your own healing. Lots of love.